All right, welcome to the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to make this real quick because I want to dive into this conversation. It was phenomenal. It was with a friend of mine I met on Twitter. Okay. Twitter. His handle is, his username is, and write this down or look in the details because he's a great follow. It's at James 11804433. You will see a bunch of random letters and numbers, almost as if somebody, when they created their name, just smashed their hands on the keyboard to create their name, as the name of this account. You will see that that's the right account. Go ahead and click follow on that guy. Dude has got some extremely interesting and profound ways of looking at the world and life. And I've been following him for years, and just recently it was just I just wanted to reach out and see if I could get him on the show and just have a conversation. Um, so thank you for tapping in. Thank you for clicking. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It is me and James talking about Wu-Wei, the art of living, and everything in between.
Simultaneously, it makes it hard to kind of schedule things. So it can take a while to kind of just hook up or whatever. But when I do, usually it's a good time.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just dig right in then. Living spontaneously. I feel like that's where I connect with you the most. That's that's how I'm interested in living my life like jazz. I'm interested in seeing what occurs.
I'm a big fan of that. I think that's the way the best way to live, or one of that's approaching the best way to live. I should say it's not the best because there never is a capital T truth, for the best. There's always room for incremental improvement. Um, but there is some sort of middle way, right? We have to make some plans in life just to set up a life that can be spontaneous. So there's a bit of a paradox. If we live completely spontaneously, we might be homeless after some time. So we have to have some goals. We have to live spontaneously to some extent. But so I do make some plans, but for the most part, I just live spontaneously. I go to bed when I'm sleepy. I wake up when I wake up, and I do what I want. I work out when I feel like I have energy, and I eat when I'm hungry. Just the basics, and we too often live our lives like according to the clock. We let the clock tell us when we're hungry. When we get off work for lunch or whatever, it's noon. We know it's noon. It's time to eat. I'm gonna eat at noon because the clock says it's time to eat, right? And when that happens, we don't enjoy our food as much because we're not really that hungry. And the same applies for pretty much everything.
Yeah, so it makes me think about thinking. Like I guess there's a difference between thinking myself forward and allowing oneself to be lived. Like I'm thinking, I look at the clock, I think, oh, it's time I should eat, so I will eat, is different than listening to one's body, listening to what the moment is expressing or being.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I think part of it is just, through spiritual practice, we tend to be more aware just in general. If we have a practice of meditating, we'll be we'll develop a habit of being even hyper aware of what our body feels. So if we get hungry and we're meditating, or if we have a habit of just being aware, you could feel yourself being drawn to the kitchen more, right? Rather than just letting a clock tell us. And even if you're hyper aware, even if you're in some sort of routine, you could feel even the clock drawing you there, even if you're caught in thought. So it's a bit of a paradox, right? Because everything that happens is spontaneous, whether you planned it or not. Is it a spontaneous plan, or it is a spontaneous spontaneity?
Yeah, what's am I living or being lived? It's the everything that you just described to me is interpreted as a Taoist way of being. Um,
Yeah, I agree.
that the paradox itself, um, I wouldn't say it's the point, but one of the exercises, not I wouldn't know I don't even know if I'm the one that's meditating or if life itself is a meditation, or we can go into that in a minute, but I guess it a lot of times I sit and I wait and I see, and it's like the body is doing the cleaning, the body is going moving to the kitchen. There's a distinct difference between consciousness itself and what the body does.
Yeah, I agree. So somebody asked a great Zen master, what is enlightenment? And this is one of the best explanations I've heard, and it's so simple. The Zen master says enlightenment is normal everyday life, except you're walking 3 inches above the ground. And the reason the Zen master says that is because the Zen master feels as if he's not doing the walking, that there's no separate doer walking, that the walking happens by itself. And so life feels like some sort of semiconductor that happens of itself. And there's no separate doer. This Zen master could lift weights. He could be, bench pressing 300 pounds, and he could feel like those pounds are as light as a feather because there's no Zen master doing the lifting of the weights. The weightlifting is a spontaneous doing of the universe. So what the Zen master would feel is the strain. The Zen master would feel the weight, but the Zen master would not feel like there's a separate doer doing the weight lifting.
And so what it seems to be is there's a lack of identification, a lack
Yeah,
of
you're
identification. Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly right. The sense of self it inverts. It turns sort of inside out to where you're not doing the things that the universe is doing you. And that's one of the things about meditation is if you spend a ton of time in meditation, you focus on the breath. It's the simplest thing ever. But if you focus on the breath enough, you'll realize that you're not breathing because when you aren't thinking about breathing, the breathing still happens. But when you are thinking about the breathing, you screw it up. You start feeling short of breath, and then you start feeling like you're hyperventilating. Then you start feeling anxious, and then you start trying to dial in your breathing, and it's never right. But then a thought pops in your head, and you forget you're thinking about breathing, and then all of a sudden your breathing is perfect.
Yeah.
So when we're stuck in our thoughts, we screw everything up.
So do you have, I'd like to share with my listeners. I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit of your story, what brought you into this way of being, um, before I go a little deeper into what I wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could tell you a little bit about my story. Well, I started off as an atheist, mostly. As a young kid, I did have some spiritual insight, crazy enough. I remember praying in bed, and it feels almost identical to my meditations now. Um, and so my meditations bring me back to childhood so much of my prayer in bed when I was really young, like 3 years old, 4 years old. So that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting observation. I don't know what to make about that yet. Maybe someday I'll have some insight about that. But I went to a Catholic school, and I was a skeptic the whole time. I was being taught the mythology of the flood and everything, and I just thought it wasn't credible. So I kind of just had this idea of the mechanical um, mythology of the universe, how everything just floats around like dumb balls, and that the cosmos is not sentient and it's dumb, and that humans are separate intelligent entities that are basically just struggling to survive. And then when humans die, they cease to exist forever. And then you're in this, you're just irrelevant for eternity, which is a kind of like a depressing way of thinking. But
Yeah.
I did have
Yeah.
that mythology in my head, and that's what I was convinced by. I was focused. I was kind of an anxious person growing up, um, because I was raised by my great grandparents, and I realized that everybody that I could depend on and trust to take care of me was going to be dead soon. And that really lit the fire under my ass for me to become financially independent. So I started obsessing about learning about finance and business and entrepreneurship. And I did everything I could to become financially independent as soon as I possibly could. Um, because I was anxious. I wanted to be free. So once I kind of got that financial independence, I said, "What now?" I have a super hot wife. She's like a 10 out of 10. She's she's super cool. I don't know what else I wanted. Like I had money, I had a wife, I lived in a super nice neighborhood, and I didn't know like what else I should go for in life. So I remember one New Year's Eve, I tell my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, I tell her, I say, "You know what? I think I'm gonna try to learn about spirituality." And she's cool with it because she's Christian. And me, I was like always super critical of religious people. So that was really a curveball for her. She's thinking, "Man, you're yeah, this is a surprise, but okay." And so I was smoking weed, and weed was making me curious. I was listening to podcasts, and like Joe Rogan's talking about DMT and all these altered states of consciousness. So I read this book called The Psychedelics Explorer's Guide by James Fadiman. He's a Stanford professor. I'm reading this book, and I'm like, I have to experience this. This is. I mean, this is just an experience I have to have. Like, I need to do this. So I get a hold of some mushrooms. I decide to do mushrooms because they seem to be the most like natural and safe. And even though I will admit, for the record, that mushrooms are not safe. They might not kill you, but they could terrify you and they could cause psychological harm. So this is not an endorsement for anybody and everybody to eat mushrooms. But I did get a hold of some. I started off low. I ate 1 gram, and it was like the best freaking experience ever. It was like back to childhood. I was just stoked about everything. I wanted to go and play in the mud. Like I was just I just loved it. I couldn't believe it. Just reminded me of how I used to feel when I was 5 years old. And I was like, oh my God, I could live like this on an everyday basis. I need to train myself on how to have this feeling all the time. And that was the big
So
motivator.
that thought, I want I so my background's a little different than yours. That's why this is so fascinating to me. Your thought wasn't I need to do mushrooms all the time. It was I need to train myself to access this.
It might have been, um, I did have a thought when I ate 1 gram. I said I should have done a bigger dose because I'm loving this so much. I should have ate more. And if I ate more, I would have loved it more, which is an incorrect assumption. But that's one of the thoughts that I had is that I should have ate more.
Hmm,
Another thought that I had is how soon can I eat these again?
hmm.
So I think my thought of how to train myself on how to access that feeling might have been emergent. This was years ago, but I think
Yeah.
that might have been an emergent kind of reasoning after I sobered up, realizing you can't eat mushrooms every day. I know some people will microdose for extended periods of time, but you know, um, at the time, I just felt I remember feeling like I could train myself to have that feeling, and I think you can train yourself toward having that feeling. Yes, maybe not exactly the same, but you could kind of bend the needle in that direction.
Pretty
Definitely.
pretty damn close. I mean, it's the Alan Watts has a great saying where the psychedelic is meant as like a microscope. You don't keep your eye glued on the microscope. You take what you've learned and begin a practice or a play with it.
That's a wonderful quote. Yeah, I think about that, and I thought about that often, and I think that quote might be his most impactful statement that he's ever made, because a lot of people who use psychedelics stumble upon his work, and it's easy to get caught up in doing too much, right? And I think that statement might have kind of save people from doing too much because you don't want a perma trip because they could drive you to insanity. And I've been
Yeah.
there. I've been close there where I tripped 6 times in a year. I was smoking weed every day, and you could those drugs could open you up too much to where you're just what too open to possibility, where you're questioning everything and you could just lose yourself in just insanity. And it
It's
takes time for the brain to recover.
it becomes a nebulous experience. It's when I had my waking up moment, it was, I mean, mine didn't happen through substances, but I've got a long history of using substances. But it was like I remember actually praying for it to go away because I couldn't conceive of how a human being was communicating with me, like sitting across the table. It was too much all the time.
And if you really wonder, because if you question everything, I mean, it's like it's encrypted vibration that we're decrypting. So yeah, if we think about it kind of from a reductionist standpoint from physics, like we just have vibrations in physics just traveling across a room, it's so mind-blowing we can't make sense of it. And the psychedelics make us think that, right?
Yeah.
But it's so basic too on our everyday life. Like we don't even think we learn to ignore that.
So what happens is it seems that as human beings we create these concepts and we live conceptually. We begin to orient ourselves to the environment based on symbols and ideas about what things are. I mean, it's all structured for us to exist and coexist with one another. But eventually the veil gets with the psychedelics, the veil can get wiped away for a minute and you can see through it.
Yeah, 100%. And we can see on everyday life, and we don't notice this. We are concepting with other concepts, and those concepts also concepts make concepts. You know, Alan Watts says that we're gesturing, and that's basically true because the ego doesn't exist from a reductionist standpoint, right? Because we somebody could just say that we're all the four forces in physics just interacting with each other, and you could just boil everything down to that, and that's as simple as it gets, and that's that, right? But you could also say that the emergent properties of the universe are interacting with each other. Like David Deutsch, he gives an example. He says you cannot explain war as well as you can with humans, like human interaction and human psychology. Because if you try to explain war with quantum physics, it just doesn't make sense. But if you explain war with like the psychology of leaders and deranged human individuals, it just makes so much more sense. So it's more instrumental. It's more useful to explain things in terms of emergent properties. So it's more practical. It's instrumental, and there's criticisms against instrumentalism, of course, valid criticisms of that way of thinking. But it's a Buddhist middle way, right? It's like I know there's criticisms of instrumental thinking. Like I know there's criticisms of thinking in terms of egos, but um, if I try to go on the extreme edge of the spectrum and try to get rid of the ego 100%, that's not the middle way. That's not what the Buddha was teaching. And I think he had that insight. Like
Yeah,
everything
what's
is the middle way.
what's the thing that's trying to get rid of the thing that needs to go away?
100%. And the story is the Buddha story is so good. He tells his followers, desire, and I think this is a koan, by the way. I don't think this is actually him literally like telling people this. I think this is just a koan, but he says desire is the source of suffering. So his follower, you know, he tries to stop desiring, but then the follower realizes that he's desiring to stop desiring, which is still desire, right?
Yeah.
And then he says, well, why don't you try to desire a little bit to desire than you're desiring? And it turns into this like infinite regress thing, right? And it turns into a joke. And when you realize when your understanding kind of transcends this whole desire thing, you could realize like, oh yeah, well the desire is going to happen, so I might as well roll with it. And when you do that, the desire to desire just melts away. So like hunger is embraced rather than resisted. And that's when you're kind of happy. Like I have so-called desires in life. And these desires, I'm grateful for them. I just roll with it. It is what it is. I mean, it's yin and yang, right? You need the desire to have pleasure. I mean, how am I going to enjoy anything if I don't desire it? So that's kind of how I see things. Um, the suffering comes with, I mean, even breath. If you hold your breath for 2 minutes, And by the end of the 2 minutes, you're totally like you're just you really want to breathe. That first breath you take is going to be really, really pleasurable. You're going to love it. So we forget how enjoyable our normal what we do normally is. Like all of our like just breathing, just our vision. If we were to lose our vision for a month somehow and then be able to open our eyes, I'm sure our sense of sight would just be amazing.
So what it seems to boil down for me is about trust. Like in the sense of what you're saying, that like to be able to witness a desire and then a desire for that desire, to be able to see everything and know everything or accept everything as it is. That's why I'm curious about asking about, because from what I understand is, correct me if I'm wrong, you did 2 years, like this is the best I've gathered from listening to your YouTube channel, but basically 2 years smoking weed every day and listening to Terrence McKenna.
Pretty much. And Alan Watts, and I read a lot of books. But it was a lot of meditation. It was at least 5 hours a day for 2 years.
And when you say meditation, do you mean sitting, thinking, listening?
I would sit in a lazy boy recliner with a volcano vaporizer, smoking as much weed as I possibly could, and listening to music like psychedelic playlists, or even listening to um, I noticed that I could listen to maybe some spiritual teaching, maybe like Rupert Spira or Alan Watts for maybe the first 30 minutes, but when I would start getting too high, like I couldn't pay attention to the words anymore, so I would just listen to music and let the visions in my head kind of guide me and just pay attention to what is happening internally. And it was a wonderful experience. I did have some scary moments too, but it was one of the best times of my life. I mean, it was great, but that's basically what I did. Yeah. And then I
And
realized I started kind of going crazy. So I stopped smoking weed, I stopped with psychedelics, and then I let my brain recover and kind of integrate like everything that I've learned.
that's why I wanted to point that part of your story out, because it points to what we were just discussing about desire. It was at that time the desire was to fulfill itself through the lazy boy, in the audio tapes and the weed. And
Yeah.
then eventually what happens is that as our organism goes and interacts and experiments, it drops the things that no longer serve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's basically how karma works as far as I could tell, because every major change that I've made in life was a surprise. Like I used to race BMX competitively, and I didn't like plan on quitting. Like I loved the sport, and I got to a high rank in the sport, and one weekend I just didn't feel like racing, and it was like a last minute thing. I just told my mom, like I was like I don't want to race this weekend. And then like the next weekend I just like I didn't feel like racing. And it's not like I planned on quitting. I didn't rationalize it. I just didn't feel like going anymore. And every major change I've ever had in my life happened spontaneously like that. And I feel like all the changes that you try to make and you plan on making, like, oh, I'm gonna work out, I'm gonna get buff, but I'm gonna start next month.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between that. To me, that's what I really want to dig into, because that's the Zen way of living, is to basically actualize oneself with who and what and how they are, how I am, to be actualized in my experience, which means like there's a difference between saying I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow and I'm going to the gym, or that would hope, like, I guess what I'm super obsessed with, to the point, like, it used to be OCD like, but it's since gone away, but just the space between thought and action. That the idea would be, and you mentioned this on your last talk that I mentioned earlier, about the master of Wu-Wei, that you can become skillful. Like, we don't think about the fact that we're skillful at walking, but when we first started, it was something we had to learn how to do. And I almost feel like life itself, um, I'm interested in the experience of actualizing one's potential as it occurs.
Yeah, life can be lived with skill. Like, you could make life, there's Zen woods crafter, carpenters that they don't even think like there's a Taoist saying about Chuanza. He's talking about making wheels for ox carts, and he says, I cannot teach you how to make these wheels. And they have to be perfect. They can't be too loose. They can't be too tight. If they're too loose, they wobble. If they're too tight, the band won't fit around the circumference. And I can't write down how to make these wheels. It's just a feeling. It's an art. It happens spontaneously, and out come these perfect wheels. And that's how you could live your life. It's hard to teach. It happens through a process of constant experimentation and iteration and errors. You make a ton of errors. As I was trying to get my 1 gram mushroom feeling on a daily basis, I was just catching myself constantly. Oh yeah, I'm going back into the feeling of being of thinking about the future. I just kind of like constantly caught myself making these errors. And then I would just have like an algorithmic way of thinking, like if I if I catch myself in these errors, then I automatically correct them immediately. And eventually the errors started happening at a lesser rate in scope and magnitude. And now it's barely a thought. But I will say I still have to make plans. There is a middle way because if I didn't make plans, I would have I would be on a road to homelessness, right? But I do manage how much I have to think. Like for example, I use my calendar in my computer a lot. Like all my thoughts go onto my calendar.
Yeah,
Like if I need to do something tomorrow, I put it on my calendar, and then the night before I read what I have to do the next day.
I'll do the same. I literally couldn't do anything if I didn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And your calendar is your mind. It's just your subconscious mind. So I just put it in my subconscious mind, and it happens to have perfect memory. And the Bhagavad Gita is a really good book about um, thinking about the future and being stuck in just forward thinking, like thinking about what's going to happen rather than being present. And what the Gita says is we want to be in a state of selfless desire. So, like, for example, um, when we sing in the shower, there's no real goal to that. We're just enjoying it in the moment. There's no real, like, I'm trying to improve my situation by singing in the shower. It's just you're just taking joy in what is, and that's kind of what I go for. That's kind of what I'm still kind of honing in, and it's getting better every day. Maybe by the time maybe in 40 years, it'll be really, really, a lot better than it is now. But I feel like I'm getting better. Like when anybody practices a skill, you just get better with time, and you could surprise yourself to the upside. Like there's been many skills that I've kind of acquired where you're not very good, but you think you're good. And I think a lot happens with this spiritual process is you think you get good at living in the present moment until a year later you're like 10 times better. And you look back on a year ago and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I was good a year ago, but wait, now I'm like totally present now. I couldn't believe how much better I got in the past year. And
It's
it's acquiring a skill. It's skillful living. It's an art of living.
yeah, it's I did this one experiment one day when COVID hit. It was like the best thing that ever happened to me, personally, because I'd been running around trying to fit. I just couldn't fit in. You know what I mean? I was uncomfortable everywhere I went, anxious, fearful, all that. And then it was like all of a sudden there was just permission for me to stay in my backyard and stay on the computer. It was like I was permission to actually be myself and live what do what I wanted to do. And Yeah, it was just something interesting happened. I decided one day that I was going to act as if anyone communicating with me was me talking to myself. That, I had a roommate at the time, and I was very annoyed by some of the things he would share with me. And I was aware that the annoyance was coming from within me. Um, anyway, say all that to say that it created it's helped establish this relationship that I have with life itself. That life itself is the guru.
It
That,
is.
yeah, and so it's like a power play nowadays. It's just watching everything unfold and occur better than I could come up with. And a lot of it's about learning. That's the thing I noticed too, is like I began to see the stickiness of my thoughts. They're just not sticky anymore. They don't hang around too long. Even emotions, none of the emotions or thoughts hang out for too long anymore. And it has just come with practice. And that's the best part I love about the podcast format, and like listening to your talks and people that listen to my show, is there's nothing ever to do. Like
True.
just engaging with this type of material in my experience is what has allowed me to see things I wouldn't otherwise be capable of seeing.
True. The funny thing is um, what you mentioned about thoughts not hanging around. The mind becomes a mirror, right? When you're in it, kind of in the Zen way of thinking, which is ironic because I had a lot of good insights while you were saying those things, and they all dropped away
Oh, really? Isn't that funny?
because the mind is like a mirror. It just falls away immediately. But the Buddha gives there's a story about the Buddha, and he says if somebody gives you a gift and you refuse the gift, then who owns the gift? And the follower says, well, the person who tried to give the gift to me would still be the owner because the recipient refused the gift. And then the Buddha says, now do that with anger. Leave it with whoever makes you angry and just refuse the gift. And so you could reflect, right? You could kind of reflect the negativity. And I've like stopped watching movies. Like, for example, there's a lot of bad vibe movies. Like, I'll give you an example. Um, my wife Amanda, she's like, "You want to watch Dahmer, the show Dahmer about the serial killer?" And I'm like, "Nah, I'd rather not. It's just bad vibes. I like
Oh
I
yeah,
like watching happy stuff. Like, I
same.
like being in a good mood." So we watch like Anthony Bourdain like cooking show where he's traveling around and having fun. So a lot of it has to do with just consuming positive material.
Oh,
Like,
I have a question that just came to mind.
sure.
Why did well, I'm just curious. I was following. I think that's how I met you through Twitter. Was I was following Kapil, and then one day I couldn't deal with it anymore, so I stopped following him. But I still always followed you ever since. Why did Kapil block you? Do you know why?
Um, I if I had to guess, see, I've criticized Kapil in private, and and
Good,
I and
good.
and I think it bugged him.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it bugged him because we have a mutual friend. Um, so I think I because I see what he's up to,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and he's not tricking me.
No.
He's playing a role. But
Yeah.
I don't fault him, right?
No, no, you
The
can't.
universe has done that to him. The universe has put him. He's found this little niche where he's doing really well, and the universe is doing these things to him, and he's rolling with it. And I don't hold it against him 100%. I'm on board with it actually. I commend him, but I don't know. I think if I had to guess, he might take his veil a little bit too seriously. Uh,
Yeah, man. To me, that's like one of the worst. I can't say it's a fear, but something I'm just like aware of and see it in others. Like I study a lot of mystics, like Sadhguru and Krishnamurti, Yuji, and Jiddu, and then I got Osho right over here on the table. And at a certain point, if you're not willing to continue criticizing or being challenged, at a certain point, you'll just become a caricature of yourself, and you become like a cardboard man rather than an actual expression of individuality or consciousness. And that would worry me if I felt like I had to uphold an image ever, even if it's a good racket.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing is if we hold these mystics in too high of a regard, as is often done by many people. Let's say I read, all the mystics, right? And I understand everything they say and I don't criticize it. And then, I converse with friends and I'm regurgitating these ideas that I've read from the mystics. I've basically become a chatbot.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like literally like GP3 4 in the human form.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to criticize um and be able to explain what these people are saying in words that are not their own, or else you are a chatbot. You become like, I mean, we see this happening in real life all the time, where people are just repeating talking points that are on mainstream media. Like, I'll give you an example. Andrew Tate is called he's people don't like Andrew Tate because they say he's he's a Matt, what's a word against females? What's the word?
Anti.
Misogynistic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Misogynistic.
that's it.
And then, these people who are interviewed and they're put on the spot, at college campuses or whatever, and they say, okay, so what about him is misogynistic? And then they can't give an example. So what these people are doing is they're not thinking for themselves. They're just repeating talking points that they hear other people say. They're
Mm.
basically chatbots. Like, that's how I see them, as in real life NPCs. So I don't want to be the same thing. I don't want to do the same thing. I have to think for myself and criticize um, all the gurus. Um, but you know, my favorite guru of all is probably Alan Watts. I
Same.
mean, he's pretty much got it figured out. He's a wonderful speaker. He's made very few errors. I have caught some errors of his, but I can't think of any off the top of my head because they're so minuscule. It doesn't really matter.
I've caught some of his errors only when he's talking about social issues or social dynamics,
Yeah,
not when he's speaking on um, like what he really knows. Well, who's to say what anyone really knows?
and that's a feature, not a bug. We really don't know anything with 100% certainty. We're fallible. We have fallible explanations,
Yeah.
and that's a feature of evolution. That's why, because we are what we know, and what we know changes. So it's a spontaneous evolutionary process, and it's you changing.
Which is interesting is like if you were to examine like at least what I tend to do is when I feel strongly about something, anything, whether it be I see an Andrew Tate video and I feel strongly about it, that's where my work begins. It's like, what is it? What is coming up within me that feels, because I literally this is, I know we shouldn't deal with shoulds, but everything's music. It's all just expression. It's all just flow. It's all just, there's something. I think if I was to point out what the ego is, it arises when it's about my thoughts, my feelings, somehow being more pertinent than anyone or anything else. So
Yeah,
I try to pay attention to that.
yeah, and that's just part. I think that's just an emergent property of meditating a lot and practicing awareness. Is you just become hyper aware. You we I think most people get into this stage in their spiritual process where you just go on an extreme, like, you go through an extreme process of self criticism and self improvement, and you question, why am I feeling this discomfort right now? Why don't I like this feeling? And again, there's a middle way approach to this, because sometimes you just have to have faith and accept it, and sometimes things are worth peeking into, but there becomes a limit to where it just becomes absurd. at some point, and you just have to live life, and you have to accept the you know the good with the bad. Um, it's like a pendulum that swings, too far. It's like calculating pi.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
the circumference becomes too big, and then it becomes too small, and then it becomes too big, and you just have to zone it in, and it's an irrational number. You just approach this point. It's an asymptote of perfection. We just error correct forever. So
Which
yeah,
is
this
what
introspection could become absurd at some point, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and it can just that's one of the most liberating things I've experienced in my recent experience has been the dropping and the letting go of the analytical, like the way my brain used to be extremely analytical, just dropping it and seeing things for just what they are. Like I don't need to understand why an Andrew Tate video upsets me, but I can sit in this chair and watch it. I can watch these things play out within my system without acting. Like that's I had a friend come on the show named Peter. We did a bunch of shows together because I met him and he embodied a way of being that I didn't know how to integrate. And so I would go to his apartment every week and we would go do yoga at his yoga sanctuary place. And then I'd record conversations with him. And it seems like the task for every individual is to discern a philosophy for themselves because every one of us is so unique and we're all wired and we all have all these different situations and circumstances and experiences that have led us up into this current moment. And I didn't know how to do that. So, it was a lot of analytical trying to solve the problem of me all the time. And it just didn't never worked out.
Yeah, and it's that's kind of a paradox too, because you can start asking yourself, why do I even get out of bed in the morning? Why do I go to work? Why do I earn money? Why do I do this? Why do I do that? And you start wondering yourself, like, if everything just dissolves into the heat death of the universe, why do anything at all, right?
Yeah,
Um,
nihilistic, Mr.
yeah,
Lebowski. We're nihilists.
yeah. So everybody has to have some, whether you are aware of it or not, you have some philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So you could have a philosophy. You could even have kind of a philosophy of no philosophy, where you just drop it and you live your life like just like an NPC. You just go through the you just go through the motions, live your life. You don't question anything, but that still requires a philosophy of no philosophy. Um,
Well, you may be
so
having a philosophy that you're unaware of or beliefs.
yeah, yeah, an implicit exactly. It's not explicit. It's just an implicit of philosophy. And once we criticize it explicitly with words, we start noticing the absurdity of it. And all philosophies have their own point of absurdity, even the best, even the mystical philosophies, even the Buddhist, and they could all become absurd if pushed to the limits. And again, that's the middle way. We have to take the middle way with things. Um, yeah, this whole experience, this whole spiritual um, road we take, it's a huge mind fuck for sure.
Hmm.
Like there are some scary moments, there are very beautiful moments, but ultimately we have nothing to hang on to. There's no foundation for anything. It's just ideas interacting with ideas, gestures gesturing with gestures. And taking any action at all, really, speaking about, trust and faith, doing anything requires faith, because even going outside requires faith. Like everything, and it's kind of, even going on this journey in the first place is grace that brings us here. I mean, because it's a surprise. The universe kind of conspires. I don't know. Conspire might be a little bit too strong of a word, but I'm going to use the word conspire. It conspires to bring us to this moment. And you have to admit, it's pretty good. Like it's
No,
pretty
no.
beautiful. Like I couldn't imagine a better way to live. Alan Watts gives this talk about um, what would he want if he were God, right? And we have it. We have an infinite number of problems to solve. And if we're here forever, if we're stuck here for eternity as God, Might as well have a bunch of problems to work on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, rather than being stuck in a specific state of consciousness forever, could just enjoy the whole process. And then when we get reincarnated, or whatever you call it, when we forget this life and start another life, we're lucky we forgot it because then it's fresh again. We get to, there's going to be another life where I get to watch Game of Thrones for the first time again,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm on my fifth watch through right now, and it's not the same as the first.
No, it's
The
not.
first was the best, but I'm still enjoying it. But the first was the best.
I was lucky. I was lucky enough. I hadn't played EverQuest in like 10 years or so. And when I got this new computer and everything, I went back to it and it was just, if I spend enough time away from a content, it can be like the first time again.
True. Yeah, it
So,
can because you basically forget most of it.
we got to wrap up soon because I got to grab my boy off the bus. I wanted to ask you about the games. What are you playing?
You mentioned EverQuest. EverQuest was one of my first loves.
Man, what isn't it so great?
It was so novel. It was so ahead of its time. It was so difficult.
Hmm.
That was a great game. We'll have to talk about that later. And I'm playing Valorant now, which is an amazing game. I can't believe how games are good have gotten. Um, I played some Warzone, but that game kind of irritated me. Yeah, so I'm mostly just playing Valorant now. But yeah, we'll have to have some off-air conversation about EverQuest. I might have to hop on or something.
Yeah, and actually, I've been trying to find a new game, Valorant. It's first person shooter.
Yeah.
Okay, I may check that out. And I definitely maybe we could come back. I'd like to talk about God too.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
down. I love talking about God.
And man, I really appreciate your time and your presence on Twitter. And oh, I have one more question. I almost forgot the most important question.
Sure.
Okay. This is important for my listeners too, because they're going to be wondering as well. Your Twitter handle, dude. How did you come up with that? What is there a
Dude, I'm telling
pronunciation
you.
for it?
I'm telling you, man. All I did was just smash the keyboard. That's all
Yeah.
I did was smash the keyboard. I used to write on Quora. I got banned from Quora for using a fake name. I had a Twitter before this most recent Twitter, and I refused to do the phone number verification, so that Twitter that you know went off to the wayside. But recently, I started paying for the blue check and stuff, so I can be doxxed, I guess. Um, I'm not dox proof anymore, but it's a trade off, right? It's the middle way.
Uh-huh.
Um, I just like sharing what I have privately without my real name associated because I have friends and family that I really don't care to share my most intimate thoughts with.
I want
Like
to
I share
ask
it,
you,
yeah.
how come?
Because we're all playing a role. We're all fakes. I act differently with my in-laws than I do with my real father, and I act differently with business associates than I do with my wife, and I'm playing a different role with every person. And I don't really care for anybody that I conduct business with to for them to know. They might read my Twitter and think I'm batshit crazy,
That's right. Yeah,
and
that's right.
and I can't have that. I
Yep.
play I play a different role with them, and I have to if uphold this image for certain um for certain purposes. So and I feel more liberated keeping my identity private online because I could share opinions that are unpopular. I've shared some things that are like one of the things that I've said that it sounds bad, but it's how I feel is sometimes I like seeing suffering because I know it implies error correction, and sometimes I think error correction is a better thing than it's worth it in the end.
My
And
experience has shown it to be worth it. I mean, there's been a lot of suffering.
yeah, same
Yeah.
here. Same here. Like I'll give you an example. I think I might have commented about like Germany or Europe. They're having super high gas prices and they're really suffering. Like they're going to be cold this winter.
Mm.
And I think I wrote something about I'm really glad they're suffering because now they're learning they need to really focus on energy independence. You know? And that seems like a cruel thing to say, especially from this guy who's who supposedly knows God, right? I'm supposed to be this holy figure, but it's how I feel, and I like sharing it. I just want to share my opinion, and that's that. So that's
Yeah.
why I keep things kind of pseudonymous.
So I've got one more question before I have to get off. When you're sharing something through Twitter, because I love all the stuff you're sharing. If I don't agree with it, the best part about it is it makes me think in a way I wouldn't have thought otherwise. So all of the stuff is interesting to me. It's phenomenal. I'm curious if are you just ripping them once they come to mind?
Sometimes they come to mind. I try to limit because I don't want to spam the people who like. I want to be respectful of people's attention. Some days I'll just meditate and I'll have like 10 tweets, but I won't tweet them all. I'll save them in my drafts, and I try to spread them out a little bit just to be respectful because I know there's a lot of people who have me on notifications, so I don't want their notifications to get blown up and stuff. So they're
So
not all spontaneous, but a lot of them are.
so you've learned how to trust your instincts of when to share. You're playing that game too?
Yeah. I write them down because Naval says when you have inspiration, you better write it down, or it's going to be gone. You know how you and I have talked about the mind as a mirror; it reflects things instantly. So when I have the ideas, and the funny thing is, a lot of the ideas I have are in the shower. So I keep my phone like on this like up above the water in the shower, and I'll grab it and I'll write it down while I'm taking a shower. But like I said, if I have like two or three shots in the same like ideas in the same shower session, I won't tweet them all back to back. I'll try to save some and spread them out just a little bit.
Right on. Man, well, thank you so much for your time, dude. And I'm looking forward to working on this and sharing it.
Yeah, and I want to say something. I've enjoyed our conversation. I think that it's been a fun process, and I think it's been a spontaneous happening too. My language has been nice. It just comes out of my mouth. I don't even think about it. Like my tongue is moving in all these intricate ways. So I'm enjoying that. I live a
Yeah.
little bit of a reclusive life, so it's fun to talk to somebody who isn't my wife because my wife hears 99% of my words. So it's nice to actually talk to another human. So thank you for that, and thank you for bringing these ideas up that are interesting, and they help me further my own understanding as well. Because my understanding also isn't perfect. It's approaching. I'm just trying to get closer to the truth, just like everybody else. So I thank you very much. It's been a nice shared experience, and I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. I'll stay in touch.
Take care now.
Later.